Hello, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Global Climate Jobs Conference 2022. This is a meeting on building climate jobs campaigns. My name's Dave Radford. I am a trade union steward in local government in Oxford. I'm going to chair the meeting. We've got 4 speakers who are each going to speak for 10 minutes. So we've got Paul LeBlanc, who is a historian and author based in the US. Who's going to talk about activism around the Pittsburgh Green New Deal. We have Mette Haugen, who's an environmental advisor to the Fagforbundet union, which is General Municipal Workers Union in Norway, who's going to talk about recent initiatives in Norway. We have Tabitha Spence, who is an anthropologist and activist based in Pakistan, who'll be talking about the situation post the recent catastrophic flooding and the emerging climate activism in that country. And then finally, we've got Chris Baugh, who is a former Assistant General Secretary for the PCS Union and a co-author of the 1 Million Climate Jobs booklet. So I'm going to give people a prompt after 8 minutes to try and keep them to time. We're going to record the speakers only and then turn off the recording to allow an open discussion at the end of the first, say, 45 minutes. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Paul. Thank you.
It's great to be here with folks, and I'm going to put in the chat after my presentation a website for the Green New Deal, Pittsburgh Green New Deal, my group. And then also I'm going to put in some general points that summarize the kinds of things that I'm talking about in my presentation. And I will now give you a dramatic reading of my presentation. I will briefly describe what some of us have done in Pittsburgh over the past year and a half amid the COVID crisis, as we worked to build a local movement for climate justice. In May 2021, several experienced Pittsburgh activists found they were in basic agreement on the urgent need for a radical and uncompromising Green New Deal. They drew together over 20 people of diverse political, racial, and generational identities to help form a new group, the Pittsburgh Green New Deal. Its activities were guided by a substantial Green New Deal declaration, concluding that we intend to help launch an intersecting set of campaigns that will build consciousness of what the Green New Deal is and why we need it, mobilize energy and popular momentum for immediate practical action for the environment, and mobilize support and pressure for policies that will make an equitable Green New Deal a reality over the coming decade. We want our activities and campaigns to build a socially conscious majority movement for a Green New Deal, winning the support of a diverse working class majority. The group went on to identify 4 areas of activity. One was a reading group with 3 books to help educate and orient activists interested in the Green New Deal. The first was Jonathan Neal's Fight the Fire, Green New Deals and Global Climate Jobs. The second was Patty DeMarco's Pathways to Our Sustainable Future, a global perspective from Pittsburgh. The third was Mike Stout's account of local labor struggles of the 1980s, Homestead Steel, the Final 10 Years, which was publicized as From Homestead Steel to Green New Deal, and attracted a fair number of veteran trade unionists. In each case, presentations from the authors were followed by animated discussions. A second area of activity was to carry out a popular educational outreach on the climate crisis and Green New Deal, targeting activist groups, religious groups, community groups, trade unions, student groups. Presentations were given to several churches, to a forum sponsored by the student government of La Roche University, and to membership meetings of Ohio Valley Environmental Resistance, the Conservationist Isaac Walton League, the Green Party, Democratic Socialists of America, and more. In each case, there were short videos, brief presentations, special fact sheets, and discussions. Altogether, over 300 people were reached. A third area of work involved immediate environmental activity, such as tree planting. This is so far not nearly as developed an area of work as we envision it being, but several hundred new trees have been planted by a couple dozen Isaac Walton League members with involvement from half a dozen Green New Deal activists. Our fourth focus was to develop coalition efforts on the local level, also linking up with statewide, national, and international forces to help advance the Green New Deal. Meaningful local relationships have been developed with groups already mentioned in this report, as well as with the Sunrise Movement and the Black Workers Center. We have also participated this past June in a mobilization in Harrisburg, our state capital. This was sponsored by a broad environmental coalition consisting of 87 groups, the Pittsburgh Climate Convergence, the first of what we hope will be larger and more effective efforts. And our involvement in the present global conference taking place today and tomorrow reflects the international aspect of our fourth focus. I want to conclude with a description of two major developments in 2022. Our organization played a decisive role in the investigation of abandoned gas and oil wells and coal mines in our area. We worked closely on this with Anita Pritzio, a representative of Allegheny County Council, who chairs the council's Committee on Sustainability and Green Initiatives. This resulted in two public briefings in March and April of 2022, dealing with the hundreds of abandoned oil and gas wells and abandoned coal mines in the Pittsburgh area known as Allegheny County. The context for these briefings is that President Biden's recently passed infrastructure bill could provide over $400 million to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to plug such wells and mines. We believe that communities and environmental groups and unions should join together to help ensure that the job is done right, ensuring the creation of good union jobs in the process. The briefings included substantial testimony from two prominent representatives from the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, the acting deputy secretary from the Office of Oil and Gas Management, and the assistant director of the Bureau of Abandoned Mine Reclamation. Also giving testimony was a representative of the Sierra Club, researchers from the Ohio River Valley Institute, veteran labor activist Joe Uline from the Labor Network for Sustainability, and Patricia DeMarco, a prominent environmentalist who is also participating in this global conference. These speakers provided data that clarified the devastating environmental scope and impact of abandoned wells and mines. They also addressed the need for additional funding, plus the need for transparency and accountability and democratic engagement. Joe Uline provided a larger framework regarding the need for working people and organized labor to be intimately involved in a just transition to an environmentally sustainable economy. The second major initiative involves a remarkable victory against fracking in Allegheny County parks. Fracking is short for hydraulic fracturing, the process of creating fractures in rocks and rock formations by injecting specialized fluid into cracks to force them to open further for the purpose of extracting oil and gas. It can poison groundwater, pollute surface water, impair wild landscapes, and threaten wildlife. Several years ago, the powerful executive of the Allegheny County Council, Ritz Fitzgerald, had pushed through an ordinance allowing fracking in one of our public parks. Council members Anita Pritzio and Bethany Hallam recently introduced a resolution banning fracking in all other county parks. Pittsburgh Green New Deal joined together with other environmental and community groups in a Protect Our Parks coalition to mobilize massive support for the resolution. The effort included petitioning, lobbying, a mass rally and march and packing the county council meeting room to testify against fracking in our parks at a special hearing. The anti-fracking resolution passed, winning 11 out of 15 council votes. Executive Fitzgerald then issued a veto on behalf of fracking. This generated an even more vociferous mobilization by the coalition. For the first time ever, an executive veto was overturned by council by a vote of 12-3. This was also the first countywide anti-fracking ban in Pennsylvania history. County council members who voted to override the veto emphasized that they were responding to the will of the people of Allegheny County, reflected in the mobilization of the Protect Our Parks coalition. This was a grassroots victory for the many who do not want to compromise the integrity of our beautiful public parks and our natural environments. It was a victory for those who believe we should put people, the health, happiness, and well-being of all the people before the profits of corporate elites. It was a victory for all who believe that government of the people, by the people, and for the people means transparency, accountability, rejecting backroom deals with uncompromising commitment to the public good. We are discussing with our coalition partners next steps in the campaign for environmental justice. Some of us feel a mobilization to overcome the problem of abandoned gas and oil wells could unite communities, environmental groups, and unions to ensure the job is done right, moving toward a Green New Deal, creating good union jobs to help protect our environment. That's my presentation. Thank you.
Great, fantastic, Paul. Thank you very much for that very concise and concrete contribution. I'm going to move straight on to Mette. That's I can hand over to you, Mette, and your illustrations.
Thank you so much, David. I'm going to share my screen. I have a presentation, just a small one. This. Okay, can you see if I do like this? Can you now see my screen properly?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hi, thank you so much for having me, being able to share our experience. I'm going to be a bit more general in how we work. I work as an advisor for the largest workers' union in Norway. It's called Fagforbundet, which is way shorter than the English version, the Norwegian Union of Municipal and General Employees. I work mostly with climate and environmental issues on different levels. And today I'll focus on collaboration with our comrades from other organizations, unions, and institutions in Norway. So it's going to give like a brief intro on this. Representing our union, my colleague Gunnar Steinsholt and myself have been working with a group of representatives from other Norwegian unions, environmental organizations, the Norwegian Church, and scientists, including Andreas Ytterstad, who's also speaking at this conference and also attending this session, I can see. He's the founder of the Bridge to the Future, Broen til Framtiden in Norwegian. We have organized an annual climate conference called the Bridge to the Future since 2014. And there was also released a book in 2015 with 17 chapters with suggestions on how this change could take place. And as Norwegians, we kind of find ourselves in a privileged position. The Norwegian state is fairly wealthy, and we have a huge state fund mainly due to the income of oil and gas industry that has continued to expand the last decades. And that we're grateful that some smart people decided to make this industry nationalized back in the days. The income has contributed a great deal to the development of our welfare state. But for a while, some of us started asking like how much is enough, and should be time to scale down. It seems to be a reluctance to realize the impact the fossil industry has on the environment, and there still are people lobbying to continue this industry for a million reasons. And one of them would be that people will lose their jobs. And representing a workers' union, we do care about people's jobs. But then our argument is that it hasn't been It doesn't have to be the same jobs. We want them to have safe jobs and green jobs and a just transition. Because it's a problem, how we know that work needs to be carried out in order to cut emissions, but workers are being left out of this discussion. So it's an important part of the Bridge to the Future Alliance is how the climate part and the job part is almost kind of seamlessly connected in the just transition away from the fossil fuels. I put in a quote here from Andreas saying like the alliance has come together behind one specific aim. It's a democratic planned just transition that creates 100,000 climate jobs and allow for slowing down the country's oil and gas extraction. And other demands the alliance have agreed on is that climate justice have to be both a global and national matter. Green jobs have to be created in all parts of the country, and climate solutions by the grassroots movements require mobilization, and how the nature crisis and climate crisis must be solved together because they can't really be separated. The organizations in our alliance has the same goal, but it also has different interests, which is kind of reflected in the conference program each year. It's indeed a bridge building exercise, including identifying some of the tensions within and between the different coalitions. And even if it takes some time deciding on each year's prioritized topics at the conference, we aim to be inclusive, which also has a practical side. The impulse to unite and to join forces is a natural and long-standing one, and climate change has contributed strongly to such unification processes within our alliance. And there's also a process of cross-fertilization between coalitions where climate jobs become part of the demands of the other organizations and coalitions. So we kind of support each other on that one. And the main activity to Bridge to the Future has been its yearly conference, where 600 people attend to hear climate scientists and others explain the gravity of the climate crisis, discussing solutions, etc. And the goal for the conference is bringing activists, trade unionists, scholars, and fellow environmentalists together. And it's a full day of talks and seminars and also networking. And we found that because we had physical conferences each year, except in 2021, where we had a digital one due to the pandemic. We managed to have one in 2020 because we normally have them in February, early March maybe. So we just before it kind of exploded or came to Norway properly, we managed to have this conference. So, but we saw it was a big difference from 2021, where we divided into 2 days, 2 half days, and it was some discussion online. But it's what people really enjoy is also just meeting in person and having discussions and talking about all of the different ways we could kind of try to find solutions. And yeah, so it's the networking and meeting each other to kind of work towards this goal is it's a very important matter for us. Also, people want and need safe jobs in the future. So how can they be as green as possible, and how can we make the transition is kind of always kind of an issue that we're discussing. And now after 10 years, we're kind of looking at how our alliance can change to better adapt to the current and future challenges we face in Norway and also in the rest of the world. So it's crucial that we need to build a movement that's not only capable of setting its own program, but has the power to implement it. So we're looking at different ways of doing this. And basically, I'm kind of here to learn from other movements, and we do welcome suggestions. Yeah, I think that would kind of be me. I don't think I need more than this. So thank you for listening. Our website is Norwegian only, I think, at the moment, but yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mette. That was very, very informative. Thank you. Okay, well, in that case, we'll move straight over to Tabitha, if that's okay. I don't know if you're speaking from Pakistan or from the US, but I guess you can introduce your current situation.
Hi, David. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. I'm actually currently speaking from Washington, D.C., but I moved with my partner who's from Lahore back to Lahore as soon as COP 21 ended. Before that, we lived in the UK for a few years, and I was part of the campaign against climate change and very active with the global climate jobs organizing and movement. When I went to Pakistan, I very quickly saw that there was no taking a template from the kinds of climate jobs organizing that I had seen in other places and applying it in Pakistan, because Pakistan is a very different context. And I of course am aware that each of these global climate jobs programs are emerging from all kinds of contexts, and they differ in a lot of ways. I think what we've seen in Pakistan is that the workers' movement was brutally crushed decades ago, and it is just starting to rebuild. Less than 1% of workers are unionized in Pakistan. And most of the workforce is extremely precarious, and, you know, doesn't even have stable contracts or anything like that. It's informal labor for the most part. So that's the context in which I came to start thinking about climate jobs or a Green New Deal type program in Pakistan. What we've basically seen and participated in is how the progressive movement of Pakistan has actually started to reemerge in recent years, and that's with the student movement and the workers' movement in particular. So the student movement, student unions were banned under a military dictatorship back in the 1980s in Pakistan, and they're still banned. And students actually, we've seen them be, you know, disappeared from their campuses, face all kinds of harassment just for trying to call for, you know, an end to fee hikes and harassment on campus and militarization of campus. So it's a difficult terrain to organize, but it's been really incredible to see the reemergence of the student movement over recent years. And those students are actually at the forefront of what's coming to be known as the climate justice movement in Pakistan. They, along with workers, are basically, of course, you know, fighting for their lives on a lot of fronts. So I'm active with the Haugen movement, which has recently become a party. Haugen means people's rights, the People's Rights Movement, now the People's Rights Party. And as I was saying, it's you know, it actually is led by students and workers, and the workers we've been mostly involved with are textile workers. And I just want to talk about a particular victory of the textile workers movement in Pakistan, which can kind of give you a glimpse into how certain kind of immediate issues are being focused on before climate. And a transition, you know, away from fuels and towards decarbonization. So Baba Latif, he's a working class leader in Faisalabad. He represents 400,000 workers. Now, mind you, this is not a formal union, but you know, he's been organizing these workers. And essentially, in most of the textile factories, fuels aren't even being burned. What's being burned is garbage. And in some cases, very old fuel, like the worst quality fuel you can imagine. So a lot of climate organizers and environmentalists in Pakistan are actually fighting for better fuels rather than solar right now, because in Pakistan, they're just, you know, there's always load shedding or rolling blackouts. There's never consistent electricity. If you're lucky enough to live in the fancier areas of the biggest cities, you will have access to more consistent electricity, but it's not consistent at all. And so just like right before the monsoons just kind of went haywire a couple months ago, and it kept coming down over the period of weeks and inundating a third of the country. Baba Latif and those textile workers actually managed through protest and occupation to get the Chamber of Commerce of Punjab to agree that they wouldn't allow garbage to be burned, because as part of their demands for labor rights and safe working conditions, they were saying, the garbage being burned is directly affecting the health of the workers and their families and the communities surrounding. So that's sort of actually a huge step, any discussion of the fuels at all. But at the same time, discussion of health of workers and communities is also on the rise, and it's a main demand being put forward. In one of the areas we organize in Lahore, there's a massive drain in the middle of the road, and this is a very dense working class community, and there are no barriers. It's full of garbage, it's full of sewage, and people actually fall in. Children, are sick, they're exposed to all kinds of toxins. The community, the entire area is just toxic. So this is just one small example of how essentially the entire country has become a sacrifice zone. And so I'll just tell a little bit about what the floods have looked like. The floods were actually preceded this year by an extreme heat wave. And I was in Pakistan when that started in March, and it persisted until May. We're talking temperatures of mid 40s, and in some parts of the country up to 50, 53 in the spring months. And at that time, I have a friend, Muzammil, who's from Balochistan. His family owns fruit orchards, and they're involved in that for their livelihood. And he was saying there's no water and the trees are dying. And, our entire community depends on the fruits from these trees. He was raising that issue, months ago. Suddenly the floods come. And these floods are much, much worse than the floods you probably heard about in 2010, 2011 that hit Pakistan. And so what has been very interesting to see very quickly, I know I don't have much time left, but what's been really interesting to see is how this time people of Pakistan are demanding reparations for the floods. They're not seeing any kind of adequate help coming from the government, local authorities, or even international authorities. The only support that's coming is coming in the form in the form of solidarity donations and mutual aid by people on the ground who are doing free health camps, getting supplies to people who need it. But there's massive displacement. Thousands of people have died. Between 30 and 50 million people have been displaced in these floods. It's just really, really extreme. And so what we've seen right now is organizers from all kinds of groups in Pakistan, even the government of Pakistan itself, which has not been very climate friendly or worker friendly, is jumping on the climate reparations bandwagon that has come out of the most devastated areas. And I think here we really have an opportunity to think about how to extend our organizing in our locales, especially from different parts of the global north, to forms of solidarity for people in the global south. Like in the case of Pakistan, that's responsible for less than 0.5% of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, but are dealing with dealing with these repercussions on a scale that none of us have seen or experienced. I'm sure we've all seen and experienced a lot, but this is another level where there was already an issue with electricity and basic infrastructure. So I feel that it's really important for us to talk about what international solidarity looks like and how our climate jobs programs can actually take into account the need to actually extend immediate support to workers and communities from other parts of the world.
Well, thank you very much for that. It's a huge amount to take in and process, and we can perhaps pick up some of those points later on in the discussion. Okay, just to finish off the speakers, I'm going to pass on to Ixon. Did you want to make a quick point?
I want to ask a silly question, maybe. I was one of the Turkish campaigners for 9th of September call for action day for Pakistan in Beşiktaş. We read out loud a press release for the solidarity and for this, as Tabby mentioned about the represent, what was the word? I can't remember. So my silly question is this. I mean, she explained a great example, something that has been built from scratch, that garbage campaign that they just kind of, yeah, they did something impossible. I just wonder, I mean, if they are alive, if the area is still dry, on dry land. I mean, the example still survives for future referrings, maybe. I mean, I just went curious about that. I mean, it sounds silly out of that 33 million of people, but I just wondered about that.
Okay, I appreciate it's quite a powerful and emotive kind of subject, and I just wonder if we finish the speakers, we can go back perhaps at the end and pick up some of the points from it. But okay, well, just a bit of a hard turn in a different direction, but I'm going to pass on now to Chris, who's going to talk a bit about the situation in the UK, and then at the end of that we can open up to this wider discussion.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, hello to everybody, and great to see you all, and thanks for the invitation to say a few words. I should just say, by way of background, my background is really as a union activist in the public sector union, the PCS, for many years, and I was also the elected Assistant General Secretary of the National Union from 2005 to 2019. But as Dave indicated, I was also one of the co-authors in the 1 Million Climate Jobs pamphlet that was produced in 2009. But I've also been very active locally through my local trades council, you know, campaigns against public expenditure cuts, involved in the campaign against Margaret Thatcher's hated poll tax, activities against the far right, and also more recently involved in the protests against fracking on the outskirts of the town that I now live in. Now, I mean, I think, you know, I'm sure most of us will have signed up to this conference because it is fascinating and very important that we hear the reports of the struggles right across the world. And it seems to me there's not many other platforms or opportunities for us to have this type of discussion, and to also not just report the information, which again is very important and encouraging to all of us, but to really explore the question of how do we translate the various struggles that we're involved in into a coherent climate jobs alternative, into like a concrete plan of action, you might say. Now, I don't think anybody here has a premium on truth, and neither do I think, you know, we're all here going to encounter divine revelations from any of the speakers or the discussion. But there's no doubt, I don't think, that about the urgency, about the need for practical solidarity from a local to a global level. And I think everybody that's spoken emphasizes this importance of intervening in a local, practical way, but extending a global network. It's part of a global struggle. And of course, underlying, I think, all of our conversation is this question of bringing together the workers' movement and the climate movement, if we're serious about the scale of economic change that's going to be needed. So in answering the big question, how do we build a climate jobs campaign? I mean, Andreas has used this quote, but again, it's a pertinent one. Greta Thunberg in New York at the Climate Action Summit in September 2019 said, I want a concrete plan, not just nice words. And I think it was that thinking and mindset that prompted a number of us through the campaign against climate change trade union group, trade unions, activists came together to produce the 1 million climate jobs in 2009 in the aftermath of the financial crash. It should be pointed out to show that it's technically feasible and financially affordable to create over 1 million new jobs, new climate jobs in the UK, in energy efficiency, in renewables, in refitting buildings, in clean transport networks, and of course in education, providing the skills that are going to be needed. And at the same time, to show that it's possible, while creating these jobs, to cut greenhouse emissions by 80% over a 20-year period. Now, the starting point, I think Jonathan makes this point in his intro to the conference. There's a statement he's published. The starting point is that, you know, we've got to stop any more damage. And it's a bit like the, you know, the doctor's Hippocratic oath, first do no harm. We have to stop the various projects that are being authorized by a very right-wing Tory government in the UK. And it should be pointed out, I think, and this cropped up in an earlier discussion, that in actual fact, the biggest spotlight that's been put on the issue of climate change in the UK has unfortunately not come from the trade unions, neither has it come from, you know, elements within even within the Labour Party. It's really down to much of the direct action and the civil disobedience that we've seen in Britain that has really brought this to the public's attention. And I'm talking about, you know, actions against airport expansion, road development, against fracking, against proposals for a new generation of nuclear reactors, plans to reopen a coal mine in the northwest of England, and of course, most insidiously, the plans that have been authorised by the government for the further extraction of oil and gas in the North Sea. So again, I emphasise that because I think this is going to be the music of the future. Now, I make the comment, obviously, we know that the United Nations have been talking about the risk of climate change from the early 90s. And from that point, greenhouse emissions have actually increased. And we know that while it's nearly 100 multinational companies are responsible for more than 70% of historical global emissions from really the dawn of capitalism, from the late 18th century. And it's estimated that half of historical emissions have been added in the last 50 years, from the point at which governments have ostensibly been acknowledging and negotiating on the problem. And so I make the point that the protests and direct action is going to be a very important element and will be music of the future, certainly in the UK, with the nature of a right-wing government that is worried about these protests, hence that they're now seriously considering a further wave of legislation designed to criminalise protest, whether it be direct action around climate or whether it's trade unions exercising their democratic right to take strike action. Again, the government are planning to impose all sorts of restrictions. So in building a campaign, the other important point, and I'm sure this has emerged not just from the UK, but in all of the climate jobs initiatives, is that we know it's never enough to just call for a polluting factory or plant to be shut down. It's not enough to stand outside calling for an end to all of the polluting industries. What we need to do is, at the same time as calling for a move away from these, we always need to put an alternative. We need to develop a conversation and dialogue with the workers in these sectors and develop a coherent alternative. Because as we know, there's a lot of skepticism. And one of the reasons I would argue is not just, as a comrade of mine said, you've got to get past the guard dogs of the union bureaucracy to establish a proper dialogue with workers. And how do we get past the guard dogs? And that's obviously an important discussion. But what you always find, certainly from my experience, is that when the dialogue takes place, there is no hostility amongst workers, that there's a recognition of the risk of climate change. There's no hostility to the arguments about the need for action, but there remains a skepticism about, well, is there a viable alternative? And I emphasize again the importance of the dialogue with workers in these energy intensive industries, because in the UK, again, didn't fall from heaven. These unions are well organized after decades, even over 100 years of struggle. But these unions in energy intensive areas are well organized. They have the technical expertise and they have the industrial power and often the political clout to develop a genuine climate jobs alternative. And without any exaggeration, it's early days yet, but in the UK, a couple of notable disputes pre-COVID. One was in Rolls-Royce in the northwest of England.
That's 8 minutes, Chris.
Yeah, close to where I was in Blackpool. A Rolls-Royce strike, which was victorious effectively, and an unsuccessful strike at a big high-tech company, GKN, where in both cases, the shop stewards and the members raised, as part of the negotiations of the campaign, the need for a dialogue about how the technology and skills in the company could be used in socially useful production. And I'll really finish by just saying, we're trying to put all of this into practice at a local level, because they've reopened, they're going to start drilling again near Blackpool. And through the unions, climate activists, we're organising protests and a campaign around climate jobs that links the cost of living crisis and solidarity with the strikes, with defending the NHS, opposing the fracking, and develop a coherent climate jobs alternative locally. And I will, it's written up, and perhaps after this discussion, at some point, I'll circulate the paper that we agreed that sets out some of our thinking. So I'll shut up there, Dave, and thanks very much, everybody, for listening.
Great, fantastic, Chris. Thanks for that very detailed set of comments.